Imagine where your greatest betrayal became the very path to your greatest destiny. What if the moments that shattered your heart were, in fact, the very building blocks of your purpose? This is the story of Joseph, a man whose life was marked by pain, betrayal, and injustice, yet also by redemption, forgiveness, and triumph. His journey from beloved son to slave, from prisoner to ruler, reveals a powerful truth. God's plan is always at work, even when the road is paved with suffering. But to truly understand Joseph's life, we must begin with the family he was born into, a family filled with rivalry, deceit, and deep longing. Joseph's story begins long before his birth, in the life of his father, Jacob, a man whose life had been shaped by struggle and deception. Jacob, the son of Isaac and grandson of Abraham, had spent much of his youth grasping for blessings and striving for favor. His very name meant supplanter, and true to his name, he had deceived his brother Esau to steal his birthright and blessing. Fleeing his brother's wrath, Jacob had traveled to the land of his uncle Laban, where he encountered the woman who would change his life forever, Rachel. From the moment Jacob met Rachel, he loved her deeply. The Bible tells us that Rachel was beautiful in form and appearance, and Jacob's heart was immediately drawn to her. Desiring her hand in marriage, Jacob agreed to work for her father, Laban, for 7 years, a labor of love that felt but a few days because of his love for her. But on the night of the wedding, Jacob himself became a victim of deception. Laban tricked him by substituting Rachel's older sister, Leah, as his bride. By the time morning came, Jacob realized he had been deceived, but Laban insisted that it was their custom for the elder daughter to marry first. Jacob's love for Rachel was so strong that he agreed to work another 7 years to marry her. And so, Jacob found himself married to 2 women, Leah, whom he never intended to marry, and Rachel, whom he deeply loved. This marriage would become the foundation for bitter rivalry and jealousy that would shape the lives of their children. Leah, though unloved, began to bear children immediately. Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah each birthed an attempt to win Jacob's affection. Genesis 29 verses 31 to 35. But Rachel, the wife whom Jacob adored, remained barren. Her heart broke with every child Leah bore, and in her anguish she cried out to Jacob, "Give me children, or I shall die." Her desperation was not just for motherhood, but for recognition, for worth in a household where her sister seemed to triumph. In her frustration, Rachel gave her servant Bilhah to Jacob as a surrogate, and through Bilhah 2 sons were born, Dan and Naphtali. Leah, determined not to be outdone, offered her own servant Zilpah, who bore 2 more sons, Gad and Asher. The competition for Jacob's affection continued, and Leah herself bore 2 more sons, Issachar and Zebulun, and a daughter Dinah. But through all of this, Rachel's arms remained empty. Years passed, and her hope seemed to wither. Yet the Bible tells us that God remembered Rachel. He saw her sorrow, heard her prayers, and at last he opened her womb. In a moment that must have felt like the breaking of dawn after a long, dark night, Rachel conceived. When her son was born, her heart overflowed with joy. She named him Joseph, saying, "God has taken away my reproach." And she added, "May the Lord add to me another son." The very name Joseph means "may he add," a reflection of both her gratitude and her hope for the future. For Jacob, Joseph was more than just a son. He was the child of his beloved Rachel, the embodiment of a love story marked by hardship and perseverance. Though he had many sons, Joseph held a special place in Jacob's heart, not only because he was Rachel's firstborn, but because he was born after so many years of sorrow and longing. Jacob's favoritism toward Joseph was immediate and unmistakable, setting in motion the conflicts that would later define Joseph's life. Jacob's affection for Joseph was so profound that he did something that would forever mark his son's life. He made him a richly ornamented robe, a coat of many colors. In ancient times, such a robe was not just a piece of clothing. It was a symbol of status, favor, and authority. It distinguished Joseph from his brothers, setting him apart as Jacob's chosen heir, the beloved son of promise. But that coat, that visible sign of Jacob's preference, became a seed of bitterness in the hearts of his other sons. They saw not only a robe, but a declaration. Joseph was the favorite, and they were not. Resentment began to fester, a jealousy that would soon give birth to hatred. Every time Joseph walked by, the coat reminded them of their father's unfair love. The Bible says, when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peacefully to him. But there was something even greater about Joseph that would fuel their hatred, his dreams. Joseph, even as a young boy, carried the spark of destiny within him. God had placed something in his heart that went beyond his father's love or his mother's prayers. It was a calling that would one day save nations, but first, it would cost him everything. The birth of Joseph was not just the arrival of another child into Jacob's household. It was the beginning of a divine story that would shape the future of Israel. Born into a family of conflict, rivalry, and deception, Joseph's life would become a testament to the truth that God's purposes cannot be stopped by human schemes. Through betrayal, slavery, imprisonment, and suffering, Joseph's life would ultimately declare that what man means for evil, God means for good. Genesis 50 verse 20. His journey from favored son to foreign slave, from forgotten prisoner to ruler of Egypt, would echo throughout generations as a story of providence, patience, and the power of forgiveness. But it all began here with his birth, his coat, and his dreams. And so, with the colors of his father's love draped across his shoulders and the favor of heaven resting on his life, Joseph's story began. A story that would descend into the darkness of betrayal and rise into the brilliance of redemption. A story that would break his heart before it crowned his head. This is the story of Joseph, a life that proves that the pit is not the end, the prison is not the finish, and that God's hand guides every step, even when the road is covered in tears. Let's dive in. The coat of many colors billowed around Joseph's shoulders, its vibrant threads a constant reminder to his brothers of their father's favoritism. It was more than just a garment, it was a declaration. With every step he took, the robe spoke what Jacob had never needed to say aloud. Joseph was the chosen one. He was not the eldest, nor the strongest, but he was the son of Rachel, the beloved wife, the long-awaited promise. And for that, his brothers despised him. Jacob's love for Joseph was unmistakable. While the other brothers wore plain garments suited for labor, Joseph wore a coat of rich fabric, woven with bright colors, a rare and costly display of affection. Such a robe was typically reserved for nobility, a symbol of status and inheritance. But Jacob, blinded by his devotion to Rachel's son, gave it freely to Joseph, elevating him above his older siblings. This was not only a sign of love, it was a statement. Joseph was to be the heir, the future leader of the family. And with each swish of that coat, resentment deepened in his brothers' hearts. The Bible says, when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peacefully to him. The hatred was no longer hidden, it had turned into open hostility. They could not even greet him without bitterness in their voices. Yet, it was not just the coat that inflamed their anger. There was something else: his dreams. Joseph was not merely their father's favorite, he was a dreamer. And his dreams, though mysterious, carried a message that could not be ignored. One night, Joseph had a dream that burned so brightly in his heart that he could not keep it to himself. He rushed to his brothers, his face alight with excitement. "Listen to this dream that I had," he said eagerly. His brothers paused, their expressions already guarded. What could their father's golden boy possibly want to share? Joseph continued, his voice full of wonder. "Behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, and behold, my sheaf arose and stood upright, and behold, your sheaves gathered around it and bowed down to my sheaf." A silence followed, thick and heavy. The brothers' faces hardened. There was no mistaking the meaning of this dream. In an agrarian society, the image of sheaves represented harvest, labor, and authority over the fruits of the land. Joseph's dream was clear. He would one day rule over them. Their reply was sharp and cutting. "Are you indeed to reign over us, or are you indeed to rule over us?" Their voices dripped with scorn. The arrogance, the audacity of this boy, this younger brother, to suggest such a thing. It was unbearable. And the Bible tells us, so they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. But Joseph did not stop. The dreams continued, and with them, his desire to share what he believed was a glimpse of his future. The next dream was even more astounding. "Behold, I have dreamed another dream," he told his brothers, perhaps hoping they would understand that something greater than himself was at work. But this dream was different. It reached beyond the fields and into the heavens. Behold, the sun, the moon, and 11 stars were bowing down to me. This time, it was not only his brothers who reacted. Joseph shared the dream with his father as well. And even Jacob, who had loved Joseph above all his sons, rebuked him. "What is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall I and your mother and your brothers indeed come to bow ourselves to ground before you?" Genesis 37 verse 10 to 11. The symbolism was unmistakable. The sun represented Jacob, the moon represented his mother, and the 11 stars represented his brothers. This dream was not just about family, it was about dominion. It implied a future where Joseph would stand above them all. Even Jacob, with all his love for Joseph, found the dream difficult to accept. Yet while his brothers were seething with hatred, Jacob kept the matter in mind. He had walked with God long enough to know that dreams often carried divine messages. He too had been a dreamer once, and God had spoken to him through visions of angels ascending and descending a heavenly ladder. So, while he rebuked Joseph outwardly, inwardly, he pondered what it might mean. The brothers, however, harbored no such curiosity. For them, the dreams were nothing but proof of Joseph's arrogance. The robe was already an unbearable reminder of their father's favoritism. But the dreams were worse. They felt like a prophecy of their own defeat. And it was a future they would not accept. Their hatred festered, growing from resentment into something darker. Joseph's every word, every movement, became a source of irritation. When he approached, they no longer saw a brother. They saw a rival. Their bitterness, left unchecked, began to consume their hearts. And hatred, when fully grown, always leads to action. Joseph, in his youthful innocence, may not have understood the full danger of his position. He was only 17 years old, filled with the hope and certainty that his dreams meant something extraordinary. But he did not realize how deeply his brothers' hearts had turned against him. He could not see that their envy was no longer just in their eyes, it was in their souls. This was not mere sibling rivalry. This was the kind of hatred that grows into violence, the kind that shatters families and destroys lives. And soon it would lead to the unthinkable. But what his brothers could not see, what no one could see, was that the dreams were not from Joseph's pride, but from God's providence. The visions were not about superiority, but about salvation. They would one day bow, not to feed Joseph's ego, but to receive his mercy. The dreams that provoked their hatred were the very dreams that would one day save their lives. The coat, the dreams, the hatred, all were pieces of a divine puzzle. The brothers thought they were competing with Joseph, but they were wrestling with God's plan. Soon, the dreams would lead Joseph down a path of suffering, into a pit, into slavery, and into prison. But what his brothers meant for evil, God was already weaving into good. The story of Joseph's dreams reminds us that God's purpose often provokes opposition. When God places a vision inside you, it may not be understood by those around you. It may even cause envy, rejection, and betrayal. But what others mean to destroy, God uses to elevate. The coat may be torn, the dreamer may be thrown into a pit, but the dream will live on because when God speaks a promise, no human hand can cancel it. Joseph had seen a glimpse of his future. But before he could wear the crown, he would first wear chains. Before he would rule in a palace, he would be a prisoner in a foreign land. His path to greatness would be paved with suffering. But the dream would not die, because it wasn't his dream, it was God's. The sun was high as Joseph walked alone across the rugged hills of Shechem. Dust clung to his sandals, and the wind carried the scent of dry grass and earth. His father Jacob had sent him on a simple mission to check on his brothers and their flocks. But what began as an errand of obedience would soon become a journey into darkness. "Go now, see if it is well with your brothers and with the flock, and bring me word," Jacob had said. Joseph, eager to please his father, set out without hesitation. Though he knew his brothers despised him, he went anyway, his heart filled with a sense of duty and perhaps hope that their hatred might soften with time. But when Joseph arrived at Shechem, the fields were empty. His brothers were nowhere to be found. He wandered, searching for them, until a man approached him and asked, "What are you seeking?" "I am seeking my brothers," Joseph replied. The man informed him that his brothers had moved on to Dothan, and without hesitation, Joseph continued his journey. He was determined to complete his father's request, unaware that he was walking straight into a trap set not by strangers, but by his own flesh and blood. From a distance, his brothers saw him coming. The coat, the infamous coat of many colors, was unmistakable, its bright hues announcing his presence long before his voice could be heard. And with the sight of that coat, their hatred ignited into something darker, murderous intent. "Here comes this dreamer," one of them sneered. Their voices hissed with venom as they began to conspire. "Come now, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits. Then we will say that a fierce animal has devoured him, and we will see what will become of his dreams." The bitterness that had festered in their hearts had finally reached its boiling point. The dreams, the favoritism, the arrogance they perceived in Joseph, it all converged into a deadly plan. In their eyes, Joseph was more than just a brother. He was a threat, a reminder of their father's rejection of them, and a symbol of a future where they would bow at his feet. And they would rather kill him than let that future come to pass. But not all of them agreed to bloodshed. Reuben, the eldest, felt the weight of his responsibility. "Let us not take his life," he said, his voice cutting through their fury. "Shed no blood. Throw him into this pit here in the wilderness, but do not lay a hand on him." Reuben had a secret plan. He intended to return later and rescue Joseph, hoping to restore him to their father. But he underestimated the depths of his brother's malice. Joseph arrived, his face perhaps bright with relief to have found them. But no warmth met his greeting. No brotherly embrace, only hands grasping, tearing, and violent. Before he could cry out, his coat, the treasured gift from his father, the symbol of his favor, was ripped from his body. The fabric that had once draped him in honor was now stripped away, leaving him exposed and vulnerable. Without warning, they seized him and threw him into a pit, a dark, dry cistern with no water, no escape, and no mercy. His body hit the ground with a thud, bruised and battered from the fall. The walls of the pit rose high above him, rough and cold. He screamed their names, his voice echoing against the stone, but there was no answer, only the sound of their footsteps retreating and the faint murmur of their laughter. Above him, the brothers sat down to eat, their hearts cold, their stomachs full, their ears deaf to his cries. The pit swallowed his voice, but his terror could not be silenced. He begged them for mercy, but their hearts had turned to stone. But then an interruption. A caravan appeared on the horizon. Ishmaelite traders traveling from Gilead, their camels loaded with spices, balm, and myrrh, bound for Egypt. The sight sparked a new idea, and this time it was Judah, the fourth-born son, who spoke. "What profit is it if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother, our own flesh." Genesis 37:26-35. His words were laced with cruelty disguised as mercy. Killing Joseph would bring them nothing, but selling him into slavery would rid them of him and line their pockets with silver. And so the brothers agreed. The decision was swift. The traders approached, and before Joseph could understand what was happening, he was dragged from the pit, his wrists bound, his cries ignored. The price for his life was set: 20 pieces of silver, the cost of a slave. With hands that once should have protected him, his brothers traded him for coin, sending him into a future of chains and servitude. The dust settled as the caravan moved away, carrying Joseph toward Egypt, toward a foreign land where he would be stripped of his freedom, his family, and his identity. But even as he vanished from their sight, his brothers' crime remained etched into their souls. A betrayal that no silver could erase. Reuben returned to the pit, his heart pounding, his plan to rescue Joseph burning in his chest. But when he peered over the edge, he found only emptiness. Joseph was gone. In anguish, he tore his clothes and cried out, "The boy is gone, and where shall I go?" His attempt at mercy had failed, and he was left with the weight of his guilt. But the brothers, ever cunning, devised a lie to cover their sin. They took Joseph's coat, the coat that had sparked their hatred, and dipped it in the blood of a goat. The colors, once vibrant and beautiful, now ran with the stain of falsehood and violence. They returned to their father, their faces masked with grief, and presented him with the blood-soaked robe. "This we have found. Please identify whether it is your son's robe or not," they said, their voices cold, their hearts deceitful. Jacob's eyes fell upon the garment, and his heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. "It is my son's robe. A fierce animal has devoured him." Joseph is without doubt torn to pieces. The father who had once wrestled with God now collapsed under the weight of his sorrow. He tore his garments, wrapped himself in sackcloth, and mourned for his son many days. His grief was so profound that when his family tried to comfort him, he refused their consolation. "No, I shall go down to Sheol to my son, mourning," he said. He believed Joseph was dead, and with him, all hope. But the brothers, though they succeeded in their deception, had sown the seeds of their own torment. The sight of their father's brokenness would haunt them for years. And though they thought they had rid themselves of Joseph's dreams, they had only set those dreams into motion. For while Jacob wept and the brothers lied, God was moving. The road to Egypt, paved with betrayal and suffering, was also the road to destiny. Joseph was not abandoned. Though his brothers had sold him, he was still in God's hands. The scorching sun of Egypt beat down on the caravan as it entered the bustling city. Joseph, bound and weary from his journey, felt the heat seep into his skin, but his heart was colder than the desert night. The betrayal of his brothers was still fresh, and the chains on his wrists were a bitter reminder that he was no longer free. The land around him was unfamiliar, the language foreign, and the faces indifferent. He had lost everything: his home, his family, and his future. But though he felt abandoned by man, he was not abandoned by God. The traders brought Joseph to the slave market, where human lives were bartered like goods. The air buzzed with haggling voices and the cries of the enslaved. Amid the chaos, a man of stature approached Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard, a man of power and influence. Potiphar's eyes assessed Joseph with the precision of a seasoned warrior. There was something different about this Hebrew boy's strength in his posture, wisdom in his eyes. Without hesitation, he purchased Joseph and brought him to his household. And so Joseph, once the favored son of Jacob, became a servant in the house of an Egyptian official. It was a fall from privilege, but God was with him, even in the lowest place. The scriptures tell us that the Lord was with Joseph, and he became a successful man. Though he was a slave, everything he touched prospered. His hands, guided by divine favor, brought increase to Potiphar's household. Fields yielded more grain, livestock grew stronger, and wealth multiplied under his management. Potiphar quickly recognized that Joseph was no ordinary servant. He saw that the Lord caused all that he did to succeed in his hands. Trusting him completely, Potiphar promoted Joseph, placing him over everything he owned. Joseph became the chief steward of the estate, second only to Potiphar himself. Under his care, the household ran with precision and abundance. The Bible says, "So he left all that he had in Joseph's charge, and because of him, he had no concern about anything but the food he ate." But it was not only Joseph's skill that stood out, he was also handsome in form and appearance. His presence, his integrity, and his success did not go unnoticed in Potiphar's house, and soon they caught the attention of Potiphar's wife. Day after day, Potiphar's wife watched Joseph, her admiration twisting into desire. The power of her position emboldened her, and she approached him with a bold demand: "Lie with me." It was a temptation that would have ruined many men. Joseph was young, alone, and far from home. No one would know. No one would care. But Joseph's heart belonged to someone greater than himself. His response was immediate and resolute. "Behold, because of me, my master has no concern about anything in the house, and he has put everything that he has in my charge. He is not greater in this house than I am, nor has he kept back anything from me except you, because you are his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God?" Joseph's refusal was about more than loyalty to Potiphar. It was about faithfulness to God. He knew that no sin, no secret indulgence, could be hidden from the eyes of heaven. But Potiphar's wife was relentless. Day after day, she pursued him, trying to wear down his resistance. Still, Joseph refused to listen, refusing even to be near her. His boundaries were firm, his convictions unshakable. Then came the day of the trap. The house was empty. No servants lingered. No witnesses remained. Potiphar's wife seized her moment. She caught Joseph by his garment, her voice urgent and commanding, "Lie with me." In that instant, Joseph made his choice. He did not argue. He did not hesitate. He fled. Tearing himself from her grip, he left his garment in her hands and ran from the house. His body may have been in Egypt, but his heart was anchored in heaven. He chose to lose his robe rather than lose his soul. But righteousness, though it preserves the soul, often comes at a cost. Potiphar's wife, humiliated and furious, turned her desire into revenge. She screamed, summoning the household servants and twisting the truth into a lie. "See, he has brought among us a Hebrew to laugh at us. He came in to lie with me, and I cried out with a loud voice." She held up Joseph's garment as proof, a trophy of deception, and painted herself as the victim. When Potiphar returned, she repeated her accusation, her words dripping with false outrage. "The Hebrew servant whom you have brought among us came in to me to laugh at me. But as soon as I lifted up my voice and cried, he left his garment beside me and fled the house." It was a devastating lie, one that played on fear and prejudice. Potiphar's face darkened with anger. The man he had trusted, the servant who had brought him nothing but success, now stood accused of the worst betrayal. And yet the punishment was not death, but prison. As captain of the guard, Potiphar had the authority to execute Joseph immediately. Egyptian law was swift and brutal for such a crime. But instead, he sent Joseph to the king's prison, a place reserved for royal offenders. Why not death? Perhaps, deep down, Potiphar doubted his wife's story. Perhaps he knew Joseph's character too well to believe such an accusation. But to preserve his household's honor, Joseph had to be punished. And so he was stripped once again not only of his robe, but of his freedom. Joseph entered the prison, not as a criminal, but as an innocent man. Yet even in chains, he carried something that no man could take from him, the presence of God. The scripture says, "But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him steadfast love and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison." Genesis 39 verse 21. Potiphar's house had been a place of testing. Now the prison would become a place of preparation. Joseph had lost his position, his comfort, and his reputation, but he had not lost God's favor. This part of Joseph's journey reminds us that sometimes doing what is right brings suffering, not reward. But even when the world punishes righteousness, God honors it. Though Joseph's body was bound, his spirit remained free. He had been stripped, enslaved, and falsely accused, but through it all, God was with him, turning every trial into preparation for his destiny. The iron gates of the prison clanged shut behind Joseph, sealing him in a place of darkness and despair. The air was heavy with the scent of damp stone and the echoes of forgotten men, their lives reduced to shadows within these walls. This was no ordinary prison, it was the king's prison, a place where royal offenders awaited their fate. Joseph, the beloved son of Jacob, the favored servant of Potiphar, now found himself stripped of everything: his freedom, his reputation, and his future. But though the world had cast him down, God was still with him. Even in the darkness, the presence of the Lord shone upon Joseph, and the prison, meant to break him, became a place where his character was refined. The warden, a man hardened by years of guarding criminals, quickly noticed that there was something different about this Hebrew prisoner. Joseph's integrity, wisdom, and diligence stood out. He worked without complaint, carried himself with dignity, and treated everyone with respect. The warden, moved by something he could not fully explain, granted Joseph responsibilities beyond those of an ordinary prisoner. The scriptures declare, "The Lord was with Joseph and showed him steadfast love and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison." Soon, the warden entrusted Joseph with overseeing all the prisoners. He managed the daily operations, handled disputes, and ensured the smooth running of the prison. It was a strange promotion, a leader, even in chains. The Bible says, whatever was done there, he was the one who did it. The keeper of the prison paid no attention to anything that was in Joseph's charge, because the Lord was with him. Potiphar's house had been his first test, and now in this place of confinement, Joseph was being prepared for something greater. Days turned to months, and months to years. The sun rose and set behind iron bars, and yet Joseph remained steadfast. Then one day, 2 new prisoners arrived, men whose presence would change the course of his life. They were not ordinary criminals, but officials from Pharaoh's court, the cupbearer and the chief baker, both imprisoned for offenses against the king. These were men who had once stood in the highest circles of power, but now they shared the same chains as Joseph. The warden, trusting Joseph completely, assigned him to attend to the needs of these royal prisoners. Joseph served them with the same excellence and humility he showed in all things. But it was not just their physical needs he noticed, it was their hearts. One morning, he found them troubled, their faces clouded with distress. "Why are your faces downcast today?" he asked gently. Even in his own suffering, Joseph had not grown blind to the pain of others. The cupbearer spoke first, his voice heavy with confusion. "We have had dreams, and there is no one to interpret them." In a land where dreams were believed to carry messages from the divine, their inability to understand these visions filled them with fear. But Joseph, whose own life had been shaped by dreams, answered with quiet confidence, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Please tell them to me." The cupbearer began, his voice trembling as he described his dream. "In my dream there was a vine before me, and on the vine there were 3 branches. As soon as it budded, its blossoms shot forth, and the clusters ripened into grapes. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes and pressed them into Pharaoh's cup and placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand." Joseph listened intently, and as the Spirit of God moved within him, the meaning of the dream became clear. "This is its interpretation," he said. "The 3 branches are 3 days. In 3 days Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your office, and you shall place Pharaoh's cup in his hand as you did formerly when you were his cupbearer." Hope flooded the cupbearer's face. The promise of restoration seemed almost too good to believe. But Joseph, having given the interpretation, made one simple request. "Only remember me when it is well with you, and please do me the kindness to mention me to Pharaoh, and so get me out of this house." He shared his story briefly, the pain of his betrayal evident. "For I was indeed stolen out of the land of the Hebrews, and here also I have done nothing that they should put me into the pit." The baker, seeing the cupbearer's favorable interpretation, quickly shared his dream, hoping for a similar outcome. "I also had a dream," he said. "There were 3 cake baskets on my head, and in the uppermost basket there were all sorts of baked food for Pharaoh, but the birds were eating it out of the basket on my head." But Joseph's face grew somber, for the interpretation was not one of life but of judgment. "This is its interpretation," he said solemnly. "The 3 baskets are 3 days. In 3 days Pharaoh will lift up your head from you and hang you on a tree, and the birds will eat the flesh from you." The room fell into a heavy silence. The cupbearer clung to his hope, the baker trembled before his fate. 3 days later, Pharaoh's birthday arrived, and with it, the dreams were fulfilled exactly as Joseph had said. Pharaoh restored the cupbearer to his position, placing the cup back into his hand, and he executed the baker, just as the dream had foretold. Genesis 40 verses 20 to 23. But in the midst of these events, Joseph was forgotten. Despite his plea, despite the accuracy of his interpretation, the cupbearer, now free and restored to power, did not remember him. The Bible says plainly, "Yet the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, but forgot him." The blow must have been devastating. Once again, Joseph had been faithful, and once again, he was met with injustice. His kindness had been repaid with silence, and his hope had been swallowed by the cold walls of his prison cell. The days stretched into months, the months into years. But through the silence, through the waiting, Joseph's faith did not break. He had learned a hard and holy truth. God's delays are not his denials. In this season of confinement, Joseph was not only a prisoner, he was a student. God was teaching him to interpret not only the dreams of others, but also the seasons of his own life. Every betrayal, every false accusation, and every disappointment was shaping him into the man he needed to be. His gifts were being refined, his character forged in the fires of patience and suffering. The prison was not a tomb, it was a womb. Something was being born in Joseph, something far greater than he could imagine. Though forgotten by man, he was remembered by God. And soon, the gates that held him captive would open, not by the hand of man, but by the command of heaven. Joseph's destiny was drawing near. The cupbearer's silence would not be the final word, for God was writing a greater story, one that would turn a prisoner into a prince and a slave into a savior. But for now, in the stillness of the prison, Joseph waited. And God was with him. 2 full years passed, and the walls of the prison had become a second skin to Joseph. Each sunrise brought the same routine, each sunset the same solitude. Yet, even in the stillness, Joseph held on to the promise within him. He had been forgotten by the cupbearer, but not by God. And now, the time of his waiting was coming to an end. Far above the prison, within the palace, Pharaoh, the ruler of all Egypt, was troubled by dreams, visions so vivid they seized his soul and left him restless. That night, as Pharaoh slept, the dream unfolded before him. 7 sleek, fat cows emerged from the Nile, their bodies strong and their coats shining in the sun. But suddenly, 7 other cows appeared, thin, gaunt, and starving. They were hideous, their bones pressing against their flesh, a sight of pure famine. Without warning, the thin cows devoured the fat ones. Yet, even after consuming them, they remained as skeletal and hollow as before. Pharaoh awoke, his heart pounding, but when the fear subsided, he drifted back to sleep, only for another dream to seize him. This time, 7 full and healthy ears of grain grew from a single stalk, golden and heavy with life. But then, 7 withered, wind-blasted ears sprang up and consumed the healthy ones. The dreams shattered his peace, and by morning, Pharaoh was deeply disturbed. The court of Egypt, filled with magicians, priests, and wise men, gathered at his command. Pharaoh described his dreams, every detail etched into his memory. Yet though the wisest minds of the empire pondered and debated, not one could offer an interpretation. Confusion gripped the court, and frustration darkened Pharaoh's mood. It was then, as the tension thickened, that the cupbearer standing by Pharaoh's side felt a sudden pang of guilt and remembrance. 2 years had passed since his release, 2 years since Joseph's plea, and in that moment, the cupbearer spoke. "I remember my offenses today," he began, his voice careful yet urgent. He recounted his time in prison, how he and the chief baker had each been visited by troubling dreams, and how a Hebrew prisoner Joseph had interpreted them with perfect accuracy. "As he interpreted to us, so it came about. I was restored to my office, and the baker was hanged," he confessed. Pharaoh's eyes narrowed with interest. Without hesitation, he ordered that Joseph be brought before him. Servants rushed to the prison, and in an instant, Joseph's world shifted. One moment, he was a prisoner. The next, he was being hastily cleaned, shaved, and dressed in fine garments. The filth of the dungeon was stripped away, and the doors to the throne room opened wide. He stepped forward, no longer a boy but a man, tempered by suffering and strengthened by faith. The most powerful ruler in the known world now stood before him. And Pharaoh's voice, heavy with authority, broke the silence. "I have had a dream, and there is no one who can interpret it. I have heard it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it." Joseph's answer was immediate and humble, his heart fixed on the one who had been with him through every trial. "It is not in me. God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer." There was no arrogance, no self-promotion, only trust in the God who had given him the gift of understanding. Pharaoh then described the dreams in detail. The 7 fat cows devoured by the 7 thin ones, the 7 full ears of grain consumed by the withered stalks. As he finished, the tension in the room was palpable. The wisest men of Egypt had failed, but now all eyes turned to the Hebrew slave. Joseph, filled with the Spirit of God, spoke with clarity and certainty. "The dreams of Pharaoh are one. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he is about to do," he began. The 7 good cows and the 7 good ears represented 7 years of great plenty throughout all the land of Egypt. But the 7 thin cows and the 7 withered ears were 7 years of famine that would follow. There will come 7 years of great plenty throughout all the land of Egypt, but after them there will arise 7 years of famine, and all the plenty will be forgotten in the land of Egypt. The repetition of the dream, he explained, was God's confirmation that the matter was fixed and that it would happen soon. But Joseph did not stop at the interpretation. With divine wisdom, he offered Pharaoh a solution. "Now therefore, let Pharaoh select a discerning and wise man and set him over the land of Pith." He proposed a plan to store 1/5 of the produce during the 7 years of abundance, gathering the surplus into storehouses under Pharaoh's authority. This reserve would sustain the land during the 7 years of famine, ensuring survival and preventing devastation. Pharaoh and his council listened, their astonishment growing with each word. There was no hesitation in their decision. Turning to his advisors, Pharaoh asked, Can we find a man like this in whom is the Spirit of God? The answer was clear. Joseph had not only revealed the mysteries of the dreams, but also provided a plan to save the kingdom. Pharaoh's voice rang with finality. Since God has shown you all this, there is none so discerning and wise as you. You shall be over my house, and all my people shall order themselves as you command. Genesis 41 verses 39 to 55. In an instant, the prisoner became a prince. Pharaoh removed his signet ring and placed it on Joseph's hand, a symbol of power and authority. He adorned him in fine linen and placed a gold chain around his neck. Then, in a chariot second only to Pharaoh's own, Joseph rode through the streets of Egypt, and the people bowed before him as heralds cried, "Bow the knee." To seal his new life, Pharaoh gave Joseph an Egyptian name, Zaphanath-Paneah, meaning the one who reveals mysteries, and he gave him Asenath, the daughter of a prominent priest, as his wife. In every sense, Joseph, the Hebrew slave, had become the ruler of Egypt, second only to Pharaoh. He was 30 years old when he stepped into his destiny, 13 years after his brothers had thrown him into a pit. The years of plenty came, just as God had revealed. Under Joseph's leadership, Egypt became a land of overflowing abundance. Granaries were filled beyond measure, and the wealth of the nation multiplied. Yet, while others celebrated the harvest, Joseph remained steadfast in his preparations. He knew the famine would follow, and so he stored grain in every city until it was beyond measure, like the sand of the sea. In those years of plenty, Joseph's personal life also flourished. 2 sons were born to him. He named his firstborn Manasseh, saying, "God has made me forget all my hardship and all my father's house." His second son he named Ephraim, declaring, "God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction." Though far from home, Joseph's heart was filled with gratitude. His past had been one of suffering, but his present was one of blessing. But soon, the years of plenty ended, and the skies grew dry. The rivers shrank, and the land cracked with thirst. The famine arrived, just as Joseph had foretold, and it stretched far beyond Egypt's borders. Hunger spread across nations, and people cried out for relief. But Egypt was ready, and Pharaoh sent them to Joseph, saying, "Go to Joseph, what he says to you do." As the famine intensified, people from all over the earth came to Egypt to buy grain. The plan Joseph had proposed, the wisdom he had shared, and the years he had spent preparing, had not only saved Egypt, but positioned it as a refuge for the world. The Hebrew slave, once forgotten in a prison cell, now held the keys to survival for countless lives. Joseph's rise to power was not the result of ambition or manipulation, but of faithfulness, wisdom, and trust in God's timing. He had endured betrayal, slavery, and false accusation, yet through every trial God was preparing him. And now he stood at the pinnacle of power, not as a conqueror, but as a servant, a man whose greatest strength was his unwavering reliance on God. The sun burned fiercely over the parched lands as the famine tightened its grip, stretching far beyond Egypt and into Canaan, where Jacob and his family struggled to survive. The earth, once fertile, cracked under the relentless heat, and the fields lay barren. Hunger gnawed at their stomachs, and the stores of food dwindled with each passing day. Jacob, now aged and weary, watched his family's suffering with a heavy heart. But rumors spread on the desert winds there was grain in Egypt. Salvation, it seemed, lay in a foreign land under the rule of a powerful governor whose name no one knew. Desperation pushed Jacob to act. He summoned his sons, the same sons who had long carried the weight of a terrible secret, their betrayal of Joseph. "Why do you look at one another?" Jacob asked, his voice laced with both urgency and frustration. "Behold, I have heard that there is grain for sale in Egypt. Go down and buy grain for us, that we may live and not die." The command was clear, and the brothers, though reluctant, prepared to journey south. But Jacob, still scarred from the loss of his beloved Joseph, refused to let Benjamin, Rachel's remaining son, accompany them. "Lest harm befall him," he said, his voice firm and his heart unyielding. And so 10 brothers set out for Egypt, unaware that they were walking into a confrontation with their past. The journey was long and dusty, but soon they stood before the gates of Egypt, dwarfed by the grandeur of a kingdom untouched by famine. The granaries overflowed, and the streets buzzed with people from many nations, all seeking relief from hunger. Yet the true power lay beyond the public squares, in the hands of the governor of Egypt, the man with the authority to grant life or deny it. They did not know that the man they sought audience with was Joseph, their brother, whom they had sold into slavery over 20 years before. Joseph sat on his throne, his face adorned with the markings of Egyptian royalty, his posture commanding and his presence undeniable. Yet behind the mask of authority, his heart quickened. The faces before him, worn and aged by time, were unmistakable. His brothers. The very men who had stripped him of his robe, cast him into a pit, and sold him for silver, now they bowed low before him, faces to the ground. The dream of his youth, the vision of the sheaves bowing, stood fulfilled before his eyes. But they did not know him. Time and power had changed his appearance, and they could not see the boy they had betrayed within the man who now held their lives in his hands. The sight of them stirred a tempest of emotions within Joseph. Anger, sorrow, longing, and perhaps even the ache of hope. But he did not reveal himself. Instead, he chose to test their hearts, to see if they had changed or if they remained the same men who had once abandoned him. His voice, cold and sharp, pierced the air. "Where do you come from?" he demanded. They answered, "From the land of Canaan, to buy food." But Joseph, masking his identity, accused them with sudden fierceness. "You are spies. You have come to see the nakedness of the land." The brothers, startled and confused, protested with urgency. "No, my lord, your servants have come to buy food. We are all sons of one man. We are honest men. Your servants have never been spies." Honest men. The words must have stung Joseph. Honest men, they called themselves, yet they had once lied to their father and covered their crime with blood. He pressed them harder, accusing them repeatedly, until in their defense they revealed a crucial piece of their family story. "We, your servants, are 12 brothers, the sons of one man in the land of Canaan. The youngest is this day with our father, and one is no more." The mention of Benjamin, his full brother, pierced Joseph's heart. His resolve hardened, but his course was set. He would test them, to see if their hearts had truly changed. He declared, "By this you shall be tested. By the life of Pharaoh, you shall not go from this place unless your youngest brother comes here." To ensure their return, Joseph commanded that they be imprisoned for 3 days, a mirror of the pit they had once cast him into. On the 3rd day, he offered them a path forward. "Do this, and you will live, for I fear God. If you are honest men, let one of your brothers remain confined, and the rest go and carry grain for the famine of your households. But bring your youngest brother to me, so your words will be verified, and you shall not die." Genesis 42 verses 18 to 38. Their response came not in argument, but in a sudden confession, a reckoning with their guilt that had long haunted them. "In truth, we are guilty concerning our brother, in that we saw the distress of his soul when he begged us, and we did not listen. That is why this distress has come upon us." Reuben, the eldest, spoke with bitterness, his voice heavy with blame. "Did I not tell you not to sin against the boy? But you did not listen. So now there comes a reckoning for his blood." They did not know that Joseph understood every word, for he had spoken to them through an interpreter. Their admission struck his heart like a hammer, and unable to contain his emotion, he turned away and wept. Their guilt was real, their sorrow tangible, but the test was not over. When he composed himself, Joseph chose Simeon, the second eldest, to be bound before their eyes and imprisoned until they returned with Benjamin. Simeon's hands were tied, his protests silenced, and the brothers watched in helpless fear as he was led away. The chains that now bound Simeon were not only iron, they were the weight of their shared guilt. Joseph ordered their sacks to be filled with grain, and, unknown to them, commanded that their payment of silver be secretly returned, placed inside their bags. He gave them provision for their journey and sent them on their way. But as they stopped to rest, one of them opened his sack to feed his donkey and found the silver there, gleaming against the grain. Terror seized them. "My money has been put back. Here it is in the mouth of my sack. What is this that God has done to us?" Fear gripped them, for they knew that this discovery could make them appear as thieves. The guilt that had long lived in their hearts now seemed to manifest as divine judgment. At last, they returned to their father Jacob and recounted every detail of their encounter with the harsh governor of Egypt. They told him of the accusation, the imprisonment of Simeon, and the demand for Benjamin. But when they emptied their sacks, to their horror, each man found his bundle of silver returned. Panic and confusion overwhelmed them. What did this mean? Was God at last demanding their payment for their sin against Joseph? Jacob, upon hearing their report, was plunged into anguish. His voice, heavy with sorrow and loss, cried out, "You have bereaved me of my children. Joseph is no more, and Simeon is no more, and now you would take Benjamin. All this has come against me." The old wounds of Joseph's loss tore open, and the thought of losing Benjamin, the last living reminder of Rachel, was more than he could bear. Reuben, in a desperate attempt to reassure his father, offered the lives of his own 2 sons as surety for Benjamin's safety. "Kill my 2 sons if I do not bring him back to you. Put him in my hands, and I will bring him back to you." But Jacob, broken by grief and fear, refused. "My son shall not go down with you, for his brother is dead, and he is the only one left. If harm should happen to him on the journey, you would bring down my gray hairs with sorrow to Sheol." The brothers had returned with grain, but they also brought back fear, guilt, and the haunting realization that their past was no longer buried, it was pursuing them. The silver in their sacks felt like a curse, and Simeon's absence was a reminder that the reckoning had only begun. The famine deepened, tightening its grip on Canaan until hunger clawed at the stomachs of Jacob's household. The grain brought from Egypt had sustained them for a time, but soon the supply ran out. The air in the tent grew heavy with unspoken truths. The journey to Egypt had not only provided food, it had left behind Simeon, bound in chains, a hostage to their unfinished business. And now the unthinkable stood before them. Returning to Egypt meant taking Benjamin. Jacob resisted as long as he could. The mere thought of sending Benjamin, the last son of Rachel, filled him with dread. His heart had never fully healed from Joseph's loss, and now the governor of Egypt had issued an ultimatum: bring your youngest brother, or do not return. The old man's voice wavered with pain. "Why did you treat me so badly as to tell the man that you had another brother?" he demanded. Judah stepped forward, his words firm but careful. "The man solemnly warned us, saying, 'You shall not see my face unless your brother is with you. Send the boy with me, and we will arise and go, that we may live and not die.'" Then, in an act of desperate resolve, Judah offered himself as surety for Benjamin's safety. Unlike Reuben, who had rashly offered his own sons, Judah took the responsibility upon his own shoulders. "I will be a pledge for him. If I do not bring him back to you, then let me bear the blame forever." Jacob, weary and defeated, knew he had no choice. The famine was relentless, and if they did not return to Egypt, they would all perish. "If it must be so, then do this," he finally relented. He instructed them to bring gifts: balm, honey, gum, myrrh, pistachio nuts, and almonds, a desperate attempt to win the favor of the Egyptian lord. And with trembling hands he handed over Benjamin. "May God Almighty grant you mercy before the man, and may he send back your other brother and Benjamin. And as for me, if I am bereaved, I am bereaved." With heavy hearts, the brothers set out once more. The journey to Egypt felt longer this time, burdened by uncertainty. Would they return with food, or would this be their undoing? When they arrived, they were immediately brought before Joseph's steward, and to their shock, they were not taken to the grain storehouses, but to Joseph's house. Fear gripped them. Was this an ambush? Did the governor suspect them of stealing the silver? Panic swelled as they frantically explained themselves to the steward, confessing how they had discovered the money in their sacks and had now brought it back along with full payment. But the steward only smiled mysteriously. "Peace be to you. Do not be afraid. Your God and the God of your father has put treasure in your sacks for you. I received your money." Then, to their astonishment, he brought out Simeon. Their brother stood before them, free at last, though his eyes held the weight of imprisonment. Relief mixed with confusion as they were ushered into a great banquet hall, an extravagant setting so unlike the grim fate they had imagined. Their feet were washed, their donkeys fed, and they were told they would dine with the governor himself. As they waited, anxiety churned within them. What was happening? Why this kindness? Then the moment arrived. Joseph entered. They bowed before him, just as they had done on their first visit, and for the second time, his dream of long ago was fulfilled before his eyes. But his gaze was fixed on only one person: Benjamin, his younger brother, the only other son of Rachel. Overcome with emotion, Joseph asked, "Is this your youngest brother, of whom you spoke to me?" His voice softened, and though his brothers could not see the depth of feeling behind his words, his heart was full. "God be gracious to you, my son." But even these words were too much. The sight of Benjamin, alive, grown, and unaware of who stood before him, was too great to bear. Tears welled in Joseph's eyes, and he turned away suddenly, retreating to his chamber where he wept uncontrollably. Genesis 43 verse 30. Years of longing, of wondering, of hoping now standing before him in flesh and blood. Yet he could not reveal himself. Not yet. After composing himself, he returned and commanded the feast to begin. The brothers were seated separately from the Egyptians, as their customs forbade them from eating together. But what truly shocked them was how they were arranged in order of their birth, from Reuben, the eldest, to Benjamin, the youngest. How did this Egyptian governor know their birth order? They exchanged uneasy glances, but before they could question further, the feast was laid before them. And then Joseph did something unexpected. He gave Benjamin 5 times the portion of anyone else. It was a test, subtle but deliberate. Would they resent Benjamin for his favor, just as they had once resented him? Yet, there were no signs of jealousy. They ate and drank freely, unaware that their greatest test was yet to come. The next morning, Joseph ordered his brothers' sacks to be filled with grain. But this time, he added one more thing, a final test. He instructed his steward to take his silver cup, his personal possession, and hide it inside Benjamin's sack. The brothers set out on their journey home, their hearts lighter now that they had food, Simeon and Benjamin, with them. But before they had gone far, Joseph's steward pursued them. "Why have you repaid evil for good?" the steward demanded, his voice sharp with accusation. The brothers, taken aback, protested. "Far be it from your servants to do such a thing," they declared. "If any of your servants is found with it, he shall die, and we also will be my Lord's servants." Genesis 44 verses 7 to 17. The steward's hands moved swiftly, opening sack after sack. The tension grew as he moved from one brother to the next, until finally he reached Benjamin's sack. There, gleaming among the grain, was the silver cup. A cold wave of horror washed over them. Benjamin, their father's last hope, was accused of theft. Their cries of innocence were drowned out by the reality before them. In anguish, they tore their clothes, a sign of deep sorrow, and turned back toward Egypt, toward the governor, toward the unknown judgment that awaited them. Joseph stood before them as they fell to the ground once more. They were not merely bowing for food this time, they were bowing in desperation. "What deed is this that you have done?" he demanded. "Do you not know that a man like me can indeed practice divination?" Judah, speaking for them all, could barely find the words. "What shall we say to my Lord? What shall we speak, or how can we clear ourselves? God has found out the guilt of your servants." He was not referring to the cup, but to the deeper sin that had been haunting them for over 20 years, the sin against Joseph. Joseph's voice was firm. "Only the man in whose hand the cup was found shall be my servant. But as for you, go up in peace to your father." With those words, the final test had been set. Would they abandon Benjamin as they had once abandoned Joseph? Would they once again return to their father with a lie? But something had changed in them. They would not leave their brother behind this time. The stage was set for one of the most powerful moments in all of Scripture. The moment when Judah would step forward, offering himself in Benjamin's place. A moment that would change everything. Judah stepped forward, his heart pounding, his breath unsteady. The room was silent, except for the weight of what he was about to say. The Egyptian governor, the man they feared, the man who held their fate in his hands, had just declared that Benjamin would remain as his slave, while the rest of them could go free. It was an escape they would have once taken without hesitation, but they were no longer the men they had been when they betrayed Joseph. Judah had promised his father that he would protect Benjamin, and now he stood ready to fulfill that promise, no matter the cost. With raw desperation, Judah spoke. "O my Lord, please let your servant speak a word in my Lord's ears, and let not your anger burn against your servant, for you are like Pharaoh himself." His voice trembled, but his resolve was firm. He recounted their father's sorrow, how losing Benjamin would surely bring his gray hairs down to the grave in anguish. For your servant became a pledge of safety for the boy to my father, saying, if I do not bring him back to you, then I shall bear the blame before my father all my life. And then, with a love that Joseph had never before seen in them, Judah did something unthinkable. Now therefore, please let your servant remain instead of the boy as a servant to my lord, and let the boy go back with his brothers. Genesis 44 verse 33. Joseph could not bear it any longer. His heart, locked away for so many years, broke open in a flood of emotion. He had tested them, pushed them, forced them to confront their past, and now, at last, he saw it. They had changed. The same men who had once abandoned him, who had once sold him for silver, now refused to leave their brother behind. He could not hold back the storm that raged within him. Tears blurred his vision, his breath came in uneven gasps, and then, before his servants and guards, before his brothers who still did not know who he was, Joseph wept. His cries shook the palace. He sent all the Egyptians out of the room, and as the doors closed, the brothers stood in stunned silence, watching as the mighty governor, the most powerful man in Egypt next to Pharaoh, collapsed under the weight of an unseen burden. His sobs filled the chamber, raw and uncontrollable, and when he finally spoke, his words shattered everything they thought they knew. I am Joseph. Is my father still alive? The words hung in the air like thunder. I am Joseph. The brothers froze. Their minds struggled to grasp what they had just heard. The room seemed to close in around them, the past and present colliding with unbearable force. Joseph? The brother they had betrayed? The brother they had left to die? The brother they had not spoken of for over 20 years? It could not be. Their voices caught in their throats, their bodies locked in place. But the man before them, the one who had tested them so mercilessly, the one whose favor they had feared losing, was their brother. Terror gripped them. This was justice. They had come to Egypt hoping to buy grain, but they had unknowingly walked straight into the hands of the very man whose life they had destroyed. Their blood ran cold. Would Joseph take his revenge? Would he repay them for their cruelty? Joseph saw the fear in their eyes, and it broke him even more. He took a step forward, but they shrank back. Come near to me, please, he urged, his voice no longer that of a ruler, but of a brother. Slowly, hesitantly, they stepped forward, their faces pale with shock. And Joseph, his heart full of a love that had withstood years of pain, spoke words they could never have expected. Do not be distressed or angry with yourselves because you sold me here, for God sent me before you to preserve life. For the famine has been in the land these 2 years, and there are yet 5 years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvest. And God sent me before you to preserve for you a remnant on earth, and to keep alive for you many survivors. So it was not you who sent me here, but God. Their betrayal had not been the end of his story. Their hatred had not destroyed him. What they had meant for evil, God had meant for good. Every wound, every loss, every moment of suffering had led to this, not for his glory, but for their salvation. Joseph had not been a victim of fate. He had been sent, positioned, prepared by the hand of God himself. Tears streamed down the faces of the brothers, their knees weak beneath them. How could this be? The very man they had cast away now stood before them, offering not vengeance, but mercy. Their hearts cracked open with guilt, but Joseph pulled them close, one by one, embracing them as the years of separation melted away. He kissed them, held them, reassured them that he was no longer the boy they had left in a pit, he was their brother. And he had already forgiven them. After a moment, Joseph lifted his head, his eyes still glistening with tears. There was more to be done. Hurry and go up to my father and say to him, Thus says your son Joseph, God has made me Lord of all Egypt. Come down to me, do not tarry. You shall dwell in the land of Goshen, and you shall be near me, you and your children and your children's children, and there I will provide for you. Genesis 45 verses 9 to 28. Joseph had spent years longing for home, but now he would bring his family to him. He would not only forgive them, he would save them. Pharaoh himself, upon hearing the news, rejoiced at Joseph's reunion and commanded that wagons be sent for their father. The land of Egypt would be open to them, and they would lack nothing. Before the brothers departed, Joseph ensured they were given supplies, garments, and silver. But he had one last instruction for them. Do not quarrel on the way. He knew them too well. Even in joy, even in relief, there was still the temptation to assign blame, to revisit old wounds, to argue over past mistakes. But the past no longer mattered, only what lay ahead. The journey home felt different this time. They had left for Egypt carrying fear, but they returned carrying hope. They had gone expecting to fight for survival, but they returned with an invitation to life. The weight of their deception no longer pressed upon them, for they now knew that grace had covered their sin. When they reached Canaan, they found their father, old and frail, waiting in anxious uncertainty. They gathered around him, their voices trembling with the weight of the words they were about to speak. Joseph is still alive, and he is ruler over all the land of Egypt. Jacob's heart nearly stopped. The news was too great, too impossible. His mind struggled to believe, but as he saw the wagons sent from Egypt, as he heard the full account of what had transpired, his spirit revived. And then, with the fire of newfound purpose, he declared, "It is enough. Joseph, my son, is still alive. I will go and see him before I die." The news that Joseph was alive had rekindled something in Jacob that he thought was long dead hope. For over 20 years he had lived with the unbearable grief of losing his beloved son. Now the truth had shattered his sorrow. Joseph lived, and he ruled over Egypt. Yet, with the joy came uncertainty. The thought of leaving the land of Canaan, the land God had promised to his fathers, weighed heavily on his heart. Egypt was foreign, unknown, a place of power, but also a place of risk. What would become of his family? Would he ever return to the land that God had sworn to Abraham and Isaac? But the hunger in Canaan grew worse, and time was not on his side. His sons stood ready, the wagon sent by Pharaoh loaded and waiting. The promise of provision, of reunion, called to him. And so, with his family and all his possessions, Jacob began the journey south. Yet, before he crossed into Egypt, he paused in Beersheba. Beersheba was more than a stop along the road. It was a place of covenant, a place where his father Isaac had encountered God. Here, Jacob sought the reassurance his heart desperately needed. That night, in the stillness, God spoke to him in a vision. "Jacob, Jacob," came the voice that had guided him through every trial. And Jacob answered, "Here I am." Then God said, "I am God, the God of your father. Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for there I will make you into a great nation. I myself will go down with you to Egypt, and I will also bring you up again, and Joseph's hand shall close your eyes." The words wrapped around his heart like a promise renewed. The fear that had gripped him dissolved in the face of God's assurance. He would not be alone. God would be with him, as he had always been. And though he would leave Canaan, his story would not end in Egypt. His people would return, and the covenant would endure. With his spirit revived, Jacob set forth. His sons, their children, and all their households traveled together. The procession was vast, a caravan of hope, carrying not only possessions but the future of a nation. 70 in number, the family of Israel crossed into Egypt, not as wanderers, but as guests under the protection of the most powerful man in the land, their own flesh and blood. As they neared the land of Goshen, where they would settle, Joseph could wait no longer. He prepared his chariot and went out to meet his father. The years of longing, of wondering, of dreaming, all converged into this moment. And when at last he saw him, his heart broke wide open. "Father," he cried, and the walls of time crumbled between them. He fell upon Jacob's neck, and the tears that had been locked behind years of loss and separation flowed freely. He wept, not with the tears of sorrow, but with the fullness of joy, the kind that only comes when what was lost is found. Jacob, holding the son he had mourned for so long, spoke through his tears. "Now let me die, since I have seen your face and know that you are still alive." Genesis 46 verse 30. His heart, once broken by grief, now overflowed with peace. He had lived to see the impossible. He had lived to witness God's providence through every twist of sorrow and pain. His family was whole again. But there was still more to be done. Joseph, ever wise and careful, prepared to bring his family before Pharaoh. He instructed his brothers to speak plainly about their occupation: shepherds, keepers of livestock, a humble but honest living. He knew that Egyptians despised shepherds, and by declaring their trade, his family would be granted land separate from the Egyptian populace. Goshen, a fertile region perfect for their flocks and herds. It would be a place of abundance, a place where they could flourish without losing their identity. When Pharaoh met Joseph's brothers, he received them graciously, as one would expect for the family of the man who had saved Egypt from ruin. "What is your occupation?" Pharaoh asked. And they answered just as Joseph had instructed. "Your servants are shepherds, as our fathers were." Pharaoh, pleased with their honesty, and out of gratitude for Joseph's service, said to him, "The land of Egypt is before you. Settle your father and your brothers in the best of the land. Let them settle in the land of Goshen, and if you know any able men among them, put them in charge of my livestock." Thus, the family of Israel was given a home in Egypt. Goshen, the best of the land, a place to prosper even in the midst of famine. The nation that God had promised to build from Abraham's seed was now planted, not in Canaan, but in a foreign land, a land that in time would become a place of both refuge and bondage. But for now, it was a place of peace. Joseph brought his father before Pharaoh. The sight of the old man, frail yet dignified, standing before the most powerful ruler of the ancient world, was one of profound significance. Pharaoh, though mighty, sensed the weight of years and wisdom in Jacob's presence. "How many are the days of the years of your life?" Pharaoh asked. And Jacob, with the clarity of one who had walked a long and winding path, replied, "The days of the years of my sojourning are 130 years. Few and evil have been the days of the years of my life, and they have not attained to the days of the years of the life of my fathers in their days of sojourning." His life had been marked by struggle, deception, loss, exile, and sorrow. Yet through it all, God had been his shepherd. Then, in a gesture that turned the world on its head, Jacob blessed Pharaoh, Genesis 47 verse 10. The greater king in the eyes of men received a blessing from the greater man in the eyes of God. The covenant passed from Abraham to Isaac, from Isaac to Jacob, now extended into Egypt through a simple but profound act. The man of God blessed the king of the earth. With Pharaoh's favor secured and Goshen granted, the family of Israel settled in the land. They grew, multiplied, and flourished under Joseph's protection. The years of famine passed, but the legacy of this moment would endure far beyond them. What had begun with a dream, a pit, and a betrayal had now become a story of reconciliation, provision, and promise fulfilled. Jacob, once the deceiver, now the patriarch of a great family, lived to see the fruit of God's hand in his life. And though he knew he would not return to Canaan in his lifetime, he held firm to the promise that his descendants would. Egypt was a refuge, but Canaan was their destiny. Thus, in a land not their own, the family of Israel, the seed of a nation, grew under the shelter of God's provision and the shadow of Joseph's grace. And the tapestry that had been woven with threads of sorrow and loss now displayed a pattern of redemption and hope. The final chapter of Jacob's life unfolded in the land of Egypt, a place he never imagined would be his resting ground. Yet here, surrounded by his family and sheltered under the care of Joseph, he found a peace that had eluded him for most of his days. The years passed and Jacob grew old, his body frail but his spirit anchored in the promises of God. He had lived a life marked by struggle and sorrow, wrestling with men, with God, and with himself. But now, as the shadow of death approached, his heart was set on blessing the future generations who would carry on his legacy. News came to Joseph that his father was ill. Without delay, he brought his two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, to see their grandfather. For Joseph, this was more than a visit. It was a chance to ensure that his children, born in Egypt, would be counted among the people of Israel. As they entered, Jacob's dim eyes, clouded with age, brightened at the sight of his grandsons. Though his vision had faded, his heart recognized them immediately. "Who are these?" he asked. Joseph answered, "They are my sons, whom God has given me here." Jacob, summoning his strength, declared, "Bring them to me, please, that I may bless them." As Joseph brought them forward, Jacob reached out his hands, but in an unexpected move, he crossed them. His right hand, the hand of greater blessing, rested not on Manasseh, the eldest, but on Ephraim, the younger. Joseph, noticing the reversal, quickly intervened. "Not so, my father, since this one is the firstborn, put your right hand on his head." But Jacob refused, his voice steady with the certainty of divine foresight. "I know, my son, I know. He also shall become a people, and he also shall be great. Nevertheless, his younger brother shall be greater than he, and his offspring shall become a multitude of nations. In that moment, Jacob was not simply blessing, he was prophesying. He saw beyond birth order and tradition into God's design. With his hands crossed, he declared that God's purposes often defy human expectations. The younger would surpass the older, just as it had been with himself and Esau. Thus, he blessed them, saying, "By you Israel will pronounce blessings, saying, God make you as Ephraim and as Manasseh." And with that, he set Ephraim before Manasseh, Genesis 48 verse 20. But Jacob's work was not finished. His sons, the 12 who had shaped his life through joy and heartbreak, stood before him, and with the last breath of prophecy in his lungs, he spoke over each of them. These were not merely farewells, but declarations of their destinies, of what their tribes would become. Turning first to Reuben, the eldest, Jacob's voice carried both love and sorrow. "Reuben, you are my firstborn, my might, and the firstfruits of my strength, but unstable as water, you shall not have preeminence." His sin defiling his father's bed had cost him the position of leadership. He was the firstborn, but he would not lead. Next came Simeon and Levi, and Jacob's words were sharp and unrelenting. "Simeon and Levi are brothers, weapons of violence are their swords. Let my soul come not into their counsel. Cursed be their anger, for it is fierce, and their wrath, for it is cruel." Their violence at Shechem had stained their legacy. As punishment, they would be scattered among Israel. But when he reached Judah, the tone shifted, and the promise of kingship emerged. "Judah, your brothers shall praise you. Your hand shall be on the neck of your enemies. Your father's sons shall bow down before you." It was Judah, the one who had once led the betrayal against Joseph, who now received the prophecy of royalty and leadership. "The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until tribute comes to him, and to him shall be the obedience of the peoples." From Judah's line would come kings, David, Solomon, and ultimately the Messiah. Zebulun, he declared, would dwell by the seashore, a haven for ships. Issachar, strong but burdened, would submit to forced labor. Over Dan, he prophesied both power and cunning, calling him a serpent by the way, hinting at his tribe's later struggles with idolatry. When he spoke to Gad, he promised victory through hardship. "Raiders shall raid Gad, but he shall raid at their heels." Asher would be blessed with abundance, and Naphtali with freedom and beauty. Genesis 49 verses 20 to 33. Then came Joseph, and the words poured forth like a fountain of blessing. Joseph is a fruitful bough by a spring. His branches run over the wall. Despite the bitterness and attacks he had suffered, Joseph had remained strong. The archers bitterly attacked him, shot at him, and harassed him severely. Yet his bow remained unmoved. His arms were made agile by the hands of the mighty one of Jacob. His blessing overflowed with the favor of heaven, the blessings of the deep, of the breast, and of the womb. Jacob declared, "May they be on the head of Joseph, and on the brow of him who was set apart from his brothers." Finally, he turned to Benjamin, and his prophecy was brief but fierce. "Benjamin is a ravenous wolf, in the morning devouring the prey, and at evening dividing the spoil." A tribe marked by power and intensity, from whom would come warriors and kings. With these blessings and prophecies, Jacob spoke not only to his sons but to generations yet unborn. Each word, a seed planted, would blossom into tribes, territories, and destinies. And when he had finished commanding them, he gathered his feet into his bed, breathed his last, and was gathered to his people. Grief swept through the house of Israel, but Joseph, the son of his sorrow and joy, stepped forward to fulfill his father's final wish. He fell upon his father's face, weeping and kissing him. Yet, even in his mourning, he acted swiftly, commanding that Jacob's body be embalmed according to the customs of Egypt. For 70 days, Egypt mourned the man who had fathered the one who saved them from famine. But Egypt was not Jacob's final resting place. His heart belonged to the land of his fathers. And so Joseph sought Pharaoh's permission to return to Canaan, to the cave of Machpelah, the tomb of Abraham and Sarah, Isaac and Rebekah and Leah. Pharaoh granted his request, and with a great company of Egyptians, officials, and family, Joseph led the solemn procession. The journey was long, and at the threshing floor of Atad, they mourned deeply for 7 more days, and the land echoed with their lamentation. Genesis 50 verse 10. At last they reached the cave of Machpelah in the field of Ephron, and there they laid Jacob to rest. The man who had wrestled with God and man, who had journeyed from Canaan to Paddan Aram to Egypt, now slept with his fathers in the land of promise. Joseph, having buried his father, returned to Egypt with his brothers. But though Jacob was gone, his legacy lived on, etched into the tribes, the land, and the covenant that would carry the name of Israel forward. A shadow of fear crept into the hearts of Joseph's brothers. With their father gone, they wondered if the protection his presence had offered them would now vanish. Would Joseph finally seek vengeance for the wrong they had done to him? The memories of that day, the pit, the silver coins, and their lies still haunted them. Desperate and anxious, they sent a message to Joseph. "Your father gave this command before he died. Please forgive the transgression of your brothers and their sin, because they did evil to you." They added their own, "Please forgive the transgression of the servants of the God of your father." When Joseph read their words, his heart broke, and he wept. After all the years, after the reunion, the forgiveness, and the restoration, they still did not believe he had truly forgiven them. His tears were not only for their fear, but also for the weight of guilt they had carried for so long. Then his brothers came and fell down before him, their bodies low to the ground, fulfilling the dream he had seen as a boy once more. "Behold, we are your servants," they said, ready to become slaves to the brother they had sold. But Joseph, with the wisdom of years and the clarity of grace, lifted their eyes to his. His voice was tender but firm. "Do not fear, for am I in the place of God? As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today. So do not fear, I will provide for you and your little ones." And with those words, he comforted them and spoke kindly to them. In that moment, Joseph did more than forgive. He released them from their fear. He saw the larger picture, the divine hand that had turned betrayal into blessing, suffering into salvation. What they had meant to destroy, God had used to preserve life, not only theirs but countless others. His life was a testimony that God's providence is often hidden behind human pain. Genesis 50 verses 19 to 26. The years continued, and Joseph lived in Egypt, witnessing the unfolding of God's promises. He saw his family grow and prosper in the land of Goshen. His days, though marked by sorrow and triumph, were filled with the joy of family and legacy. The scriptures tell us, Joseph remained in Egypt, he and his father's house. Joseph lived 110 years. His life, though forged in suffering, ended in fullness. He lived to see Ephraim's children to the third generation, and the children of Machir, the son of Manasseh, were counted as his own. The joy of holding his great-grandchildren in his arms, of witnessing the generations that sprang from his obedience and faith, brought him peace. His family, once fractured by jealousy and deceit, now stood united, a people growing into the nation God had promised. But as his years waned, Joseph's thoughts turned not to Egypt but to Canaan, the land of the covenant. His body may have lived in Egypt, but his heart belonged to the land that God had sworn to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And so he gathered his family and spoke his final words, not of fear or regret, but of faith. "I am about to die, but God will visit you and bring you up out of this land to the land that he swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob." His eyes, though dim with age, were fixed on the future. He saw beyond Egypt's riches to the promise of God. Egypt was a place of provision, but it was never meant to be their home. God would come for them, he would lead them out. Then Joseph made them swear an oath, binding his family to the covenant he held dear. "God will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones from here." His request was not about burial alone, it was about belonging. His body was to rest in the land of promise, not in the land of exile. His final act was one of faith, declaring that even in death, he was part of God's plan for his people. Full of years and full of faith. So Joseph died, being 110 years old. They embalmed him, and he was put in a coffin in Egypt. His body remained in Egypt, but his story, his legacy lived on. The coffin stood as a silent witness to his prophecy, a reminder that Egypt was not their final destination. When the day of deliverance came, his bones would rise with his people, carried to the land of their fathers. Generations later, Moses would carry those bones out of Egypt, and centuries after that, Joshua would bury them in Shechem. Joshua 24 verse 32. In doing so, they fulfilled not only a promise to Joseph, but a testament to his faith that God always finishes what he begins. Joseph's life is more than a story. It is a testament to God's sovereignty, the power of forgiveness, and the beauty of faithfulness through suffering. From the heights of his father's favor to the depths of a prison cell, from betrayal by his brothers to ruling over Egypt, Joseph's journey reveals that no moment is wasted in God's hands. Every pit, every prison, and every palace was part of a greater plan. Through every trial, God was weaving a masterpiece, turning what was meant for evil into something infinitely good. One of the most profound themes of Joseph's life is God's sovereignty. Though his life seemed to spiral out of control, God's hand was guiding every step. His brother's betrayal led him to Egypt, but it also positioned him to save countless lives from famine. Potiphar's house became a place of both testing and training. Even prison, a symbol of confinement, became a gateway to his greatest opportunity. In every setback, God was setting him up for something greater. Joseph's life teaches us that God is always working, even when we cannot see it. But Joseph's story is also a story of forgiveness. The moment his brothers stood before him vulnerable and afraid, he chose grace over revenge. "You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good." These words are not just about the past, they are about perspective. Forgiveness is not denying the pain, it is choosing to let God transform it. Joseph's ability to forgive was not because his suffering was small, but because his God was great. And in that forgiveness, he not only freed his brothers, he freed himself. Above all, Joseph's life is a story of faithfulness through suffering. He did not see the fulfillment of his dreams immediately. Years passed in slavery and prison, but he never abandoned his faith. He could have become bitter. He could have walked away from God. But instead, he served faithfully wherever he was, in Potiphar's house, in prison, and in Pharaoh's court. And because he was faithful in the waiting, God entrusted him with the fulfillment. In many ways, Joseph's journey mirrors our own. We all face betrayal, disappointment, and hardship. We all encounter seasons where God seems silent, where dreams feel distant, and where the pit feels deeper than the promise. But Joseph's life reminds us, God is still writing our story. The pain may be part of the process, but it is not the end. What others mean for harm, God will use for our good. The trials that feel unbearable today may be the very things that prepare us for our purpose tomorrow. If you are watching this today, I want to remind you, no suffering is wasted in God's hands. If you are in the pit of despair, hold on. If you feel imprisoned by your circumstances, remain faithful. If betrayal has wounded your heart, let forgiveness free you. Because God sees, God knows, and God is working. Let us pray together. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the story of Joseph, a story of hope, redemption, and your unfailing love. We ask you to help us trust you in every season, even when life feels unfair. Teach us to forgive those who have hurt us and to see your purpose in every pain. Strengthen our faith when we feel forgotten and remind us that you are always working for our good. Today, we surrender our dreams, our struggles, and our future to you. We believe that what the enemy meant for evil, you will turn for good. In Jesus' name, amen. If this message has touched your heart, please like this video, comment with your thoughts, and subscribe to this channel for more inspiring content. Share this story with someone who needs a reminder that God is faithful, even in the darkest times. Together, let's spread the hope of Joseph's story and remind the world, no matter the pain, God has a plan. Thank you for joining us today. May you walk forward with the same faith Joseph carried, and may you see God's goodness in every chapter of your life.